It being a little after 6 o'clock, I will go ahead and call this special order session to order. All members, if you could please press your attend buttons and silence any cell phones. First item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by the invocation by Supervisor Locke. We are still without our flag, however, we did improvise tonight, so if you could please rise and face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now the invocation by Supervisor Locke.
We come to you in this new year of 2019 asking for your blessings and help as we are gathered together this evening. Show us how to conduct our work with a spirit of joy and enthusiasm. Amen.
Thank you, Supervisor Locke. And I do want to thank the county clerk and the finance director for their improvisation with the flag. Appreciate that tonight. So next item on the agenda is to adopt the agenda for this evening. I'll call on Supervisor Wobble.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll move for the adoption of this evening's agenda.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. So moving on down to the next item, and that is an opportunity for the public to speak on anything on the agenda this evening or anything under county jurisdiction. Is there anyone who wishes to speak? Is there anyone who wishes to speak? I'll say one more time, is there anyone who wishes to speak? Seeing none, we'll close that portion of the meeting and move right down to reports from committees, commissions, and boards. Anyone with any reports? Seeing none, we will move on to the next item on the agenda, and that is the County Board Chairman's report. A few things. First, Supervisor Ben Joas asked to be excused this evening. And then I wanted to make you aware that Supervisor Jesse Wallen has resigned from the board. He has actually moved out of his district. So we will shortly begin the process of identifying and soliciting for an appointment to that position. Also wanted to make you aware that Supervisor Tim Hogan will be resigning from the board, and this will be his last meeting with us, and that is because he simply moved out of the district as well. So obviously because of that, he cannot serve on the board, and he's let us to know that he would be resigning after this meeting. I did want to take this opportunity to thank you, Supervisor Hogan, for your time on this board and certainly for your efforts, and certainly wish you best of luck with all the future endeavors. All right. And that actually concludes my report. Nothing further. Certainly. And just one other item, the agenda was published for next week's session, and you'll see a packet on your desk with the items for that meeting as well this evening. So that concludes my report, so we'll move right on down to the two presentations. So we have two presentations tonight. First one is by our airport director, Jim Schell, and he's going to provide a 2018 year in review and plans for 2019. So I'll let you take over.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Ramos, members of the board. Is this on?
There you go.
So how can everybody hear me okay with this? How about now? Can everybody hear me all right? All right. So I'm not going to use the mic. I don't really like to stand in front of a podium when I speak. Plus, no, they can't hear me on TV. Well, I'm not so concerned about TV. All right, so I'll start off over here, and hopefully we need one of those. We need one of those mics that pins to the. Okay, we'll look into that for next time. Okay. So again, thank you all for having me here. Thank you all for spending your time with me this evening, and hopefully it'll be informative. I've got a number of slides. First few slides just to sort of get the ball rolling on the airport in general, and some information about what we are as an airport, what we're here to facilitate, a little bit of education, and then we'll dive right into some of the things we've been working on in 2018 as that has wrapped up now, and what we're going to be working on in 2019. Sort of a high level overview of what's going on at the airport. I know a number of supervisors, both on the aviation committee and the facilities committee, have had a chance now to take some extensive tours of the airport. I think that's been hopefully a good spending of your time in order to come out and see the things that are going on. It's much different to see it on a slide or hear me talk about it, but it's a whole other thing to see it. And I think a few of those supervisors can attest to that already. So with that being said, I believe everybody has a handout of the slides that we're going to have here up on the screen. But just to get going, who's heard this word, general aviation? Has anybody heard this word in the past? A few hands. So I think it's one of the most misunderstood terms in our industry. There's a number of airports in the state of Wisconsin. In fact, there's 127 airports, public use airports in the state. 10 plus or minus of those are commercial service airports. You can get on an airline flight, and I think everyone understands what that entails. So the rest of the airports in the state are what we call general aviation. So plus or minus 117 airports. What is general aviation? It simply is, a very broad definition, is really everything but airline service and military operations. But it runs the gamut from a number of things that you see up there on the screen, corporate travel, charter travel, a number of other applications that not only are those portions of general aviation, portions of what that term means and represents, but like it says on the bottom, there's a lot more to it than just what's on the slide. I don't want to keep going with every single aspect of general aviation, but every single one that you see up there on the slide is something that the Whitman Airport does facilitate. So why should we care about GA, right? There's a lot of folks out there that might say, okay, a GA airport, you know, we can't get on an airline flight. You can't just buy a ticket, go on an airline flight. So why is it important? Why should it matter? Well, there's a list of 5 things up there. And what I will jump down to on that list is diversification of the local economy. So if you don't have an airport in your community, you're not going to have those type of jobs that an airport typically produces and helps develop and increase over time in order to stimulate the economy from a perspective that, simply put, if you don't have an airport, you're not going to have those jobs in that community. So GA is important to our community. A strong GA airport, which Whitman is, and I'll detail the why here in a minute, is important for economic diversification. It's important for stimulating the economy with our economic impact, which I'll talk about here in a minute. And then we have a role in the national air transportation system. People utilize the airport to get to and from where they're going, however it is they're doing that, typically in an airplane, right? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and show a quick 4-minute video. It really is designed to show you everything, well, most everything that's going on at the airport that isn't AirVenture. How many people, show of hands in the room then, how many people have heard of EAA's AirVenture Oshkosh? How many people? Everybody? Okay, great. So primarily this presentation has nothing about that. It's about everything else that's going on at the airport. And I think this video does a very good job of showing that. So I'm going to go ahead and play it for you. everybody think? Is that decent video? Kind of showcases what's going on at the airport. Is it pretty well done? And I will say that video had nothing to do with me, so don't congratulate me. But we did have a pretty talented production team that put that together. A lot of time-lapse photography, as you saw, and videography in putting that together. But well, it doesn't showcase every single business out at the airport. It paints a pretty good picture of a sampling of what is out there, so we're pretty proud of it. So what is all that happening out at the airport? The businesses, the traffic that's going on from day to day. What does that all kind of translate into? Well, one of the biggest things is the economic impact it has on the region. So we've done 2 economic impact studies over the years between the airport and what EAA does on their own. And we've got the last 2 up there, which would be 2012 for the airport. It was done by the Winnebago County UW Extension Office. So independently done based upon a lot of survey data of primarily the businesses that are at the airport and what are the impacts of the jobs they create, what are the impacts of all of the revenue they produce for the county and goes back into the tax base and things like that. So we have 40.7 million. That was in 2012. We're actually looking at possibility of updating that economic impact study for 2019. I feel there were some things that were left out in looking at the methodology of how it's done. However, it is a very solid number. So that focuses on everything but AirVenture. So the other 50 weeks out of the year, the businesses that are there, the operations that are there, the amount of money that it brings to the area. And then you have AirVenture, right? And everybody said they've heard of it, right? Have you seen the economic impact numbers from AirVenture? This was done in 2017. It was for 2017's convention. Thereafter, it was done by the UWO Business Success Center, so independently done. Its focus was on visitor spending, exhibitor spending primarily, and it shows $170 million economic impact. So while there are lots of events in Event City, AirVenture's the biggest, for sure, by far. There's no doubt about that. 2,033 jobs that it ties to that, and about 548 for the rest of the year from just the airport. So what does that come out? Bottom line, I think everybody can see that up there, $210 million. I mean, that's huge, right? So I really couldn't overstate that figure enough. And I really couldn't overstate the fact that I think that figure is undervalued. But however, $210 million, that's what we can hang our hat on today. And if you have any questions about economic impact studies, I'd be happy to answer them afterwards. In fact, any questions I'll be happy to answer at the end of the presentation. So how busy is Whitman, right? On an average given year, we do about 70,000 operations in the last few years. So an operation is defined by the FAA as a takeoff or a landing at the airport. It's counted by our air traffic control tower, who's an independent contractor. Midwest Air Traffic Control Services is who contracts with the FAA to provide the ATC services here at the Whitman Airport. And they tabulate this operations count every single day, 365 days of the year. So that's how it's tallied. What that means is every year between 16 and 20,000 operations are due to AirVenture, right? In the 10-day period surrounding that window, we're the busiest airport in the whole world, and the busiest control tower, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, when you look at that as a portion of what we do the rest of the year, about 50,000, actually this year a little bit more. 2018, we hit 76,219 operations. So we are trending in the positive direction. There are a number of factors behind that, but if you pull that out and go to the next slide and how we stack up in the state, we have 2 airports that are ahead of us by an operations count. Both of those airports have commercial service, right? So Milwaukee, Madison, those are number 1 and number 2. Again, by an operations count data point. And number 3 is Oshkosh, Whitman Regional Airport, number 3 in the state. And even if you were to take out the about 20,000 operations we had for 2018's convention, we're still at plus or minus 56,000. And the next airport down on the list, which is Kenosha, has about 53,000. So even if you were, not to say we'd want to take that away because those operations certainly do count. Obviously you saw the economic impact numbers that come with those 20,000 operations in 10 days. But even if you were to take that away, we're still the third busiest airport in the state, the #1 busiest airport for general aviation airports. And I will tell you, one of the only ways general aviation airports, and there's a number of others, but one of the primary ways general aviation airports are going to measure themselves is by operations count. Based aircraft would be another one, and I've got that number down the line. But it's something to be proud of here in this community. It certainly is. It's the reason I'm standing before you today. So those are the numbers on how we get to be the busiest GA airport in the state. And then also on the bottom is where the data sources came from. So you saw a little bit in the what we call the Four Seasons of Whitman video that you watched. There's over a dozen businesses, and that list is hopefully all inclusive, but if not, that's why I put et cetera at the end. We've got a couple new ones here this year that we've added to that list. Excuse me. So over a dozen businesses operating on the airport. That kind of goes into those economic impact numbers, the amount of jobs they create. As you see in that list, EAA is one of them, right? They have their headquarters here. They employ a number of staff members here locally. They employ staff members other places in the country. However, most of that, as far as that organization, is here. And that's something that I think sometimes might get overlooked. They are here 365 days of the year. They're headquartered here, and they're one of the larger employers on the airport, if not the largest employer. Multiple corporate flight departments use our airport. They're listed there on the slide. There's a few others as well. Whether it's a corporation or it's someone that's using their airplane for business, right? There's a number of independent folks out at the airport. We have in fact, in the business list, Dr. Mann, he's a neurosurgeon, I believe, and he has his practice there and a hangar, right? And so he is able to get around the state, get around the Midwest for his business, right? And that's one of those things that, again, I don't think gets talked about a whole lot, but it's something important to understand. And again, unofficially now, we just did our last based aircraft count, and we'll submit that to the FAA here in the next month or so. 181 based aircraft, so that's one of the higher amounts in the state. Don't ask me to rank them because I didn't come prepared with that, but 181 based aircraft. Very busy airport and a well-utilized airport. So a few of the things, again, some of this was in the video, but some of it was not. We've got flight training. That's a simulator at Fox Valley Technical College. Their numbers have been growing quite rapidly in the last year and a half, 2 years, as pilot demand just keeps going up and up and up. In fact, we've got another flight school that has started in the last year to 18 months that's doing rather well at the airport as well. Aircraft Modification Center. So you saw it in the time lapse of Basler Turbo Conversions. They are the only company of their kind in the United States. They convert DC-3s into turbine DC-3s, essentially, for customers all over the world, going all over the world for a number of different purposes. So that's a picture of their hangar inside of it, one of the aircraft that they're working on. Fox Valley Tech also has an aircraft maintenance, A&P, we call it, aircraft maintenance technician program, so aircraft mechanic essentially, along with the flight training program and then aircraft avionics as well. So they've got a number of programs there in that facility down in the south end of the airport. The one in the corner, that's Myers Aviation. It wasn't included in the video, however, they are actually highlighted. If you haven't had a chance to read it, I encourage you to. We put out a quarterly newsletter just about 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago. I think we actually went out to the county board last week. Was tracking down some email addresses. So, and if you do need, I was going to say this for the end, if you do need a hard copy, I believe Sue has some hard copies of our quarterly newsletter. But Myers Aviation was profiled in there. They're a business that I don't think a whole lot of people know about, at least in the community, of what they offer and what they do. So there's a pretty nice write-up in the newsletter on what Myers does. So that's a picture of them in the corner. Regional Air Cargo, we have Pac Air, Max Air, kind of two different companies under one umbrella that flies in cargo in and out of Oshkosh, in and out of the Whitman Airport for a few different contractors, UPS being one of them. And then, of course, Sonics, that was featured in the video, manufacture aircraft, essentially kit airplanes for anyone to buy. Number of different models and designs that they've come up with over the years, and they've been in this community for a very long time. So some of the business traffic, primarily business traffic, that's coming in and out of the airport on a daily basis, weekly basis, is shown there, and then some of the aircraft that they're utilizing for those trips. And then this is a shot of the ones that aren't based here, right? This is just a couple of jets that came in for most likely business purposes, but there's a number of different reasons we all travel, right? And so this is just the general aviation side of what's going on at the airport for the transient traffic, what's coming in or out of Basler Flight Service, which would be the airport's FBO or fixed-based operator. And we'll talk a little bit about the facility, well actually we'll talk a fair amount about the facility they're operating out of and what we need long-term at the airport for a facility like that. So with that, I'm going to transition into 3 projects. We've got a number of other projects going on at the airport, but these are probably the high-level ones, the high-priority ones right now. And I would venture to say the 3 top high-priority projects for the airport in 2019, in 2020, and beyond. So I will go through each one in a fair amount of detail. How much time do I have? I'll be as short as possible. All right, so
20
a fair
minutes.
amount of detail. When I say GA support facility, we all know what GA is, right? General aviation now. And support facility, really just exactly what it sounds like. And we're going to look at a few different regional GA support facilities. One I think this board is familiar with is in Fond du Lac, just down the street. This was built in 2009. I wouldn't get too wrapped up in the construction costs. 2009 was a bit of a different time than 2019 is as far as that goes. But this is what they did. And again, this is a factual presentation, so this is what they built in 2009, about 6,500 square feet. And what you see on the slide is the airside or arriving aircraft, what they see of the building, and what you see on the bottom right is the departing aircraft when you're coming back to the building to get out and depart if you're using the facility. So it's kind of the gateway to that community because it is only a general aviation airport. Now I say that one is only general aviation. Everyone I think should be familiar with Appleton, right? Appleton International now, it used to be Outagamie County. That airport of course has commercial air service. But what we're showing here is their GA facility, their General Aviation Support Facility. So they built this building. If you haven't seen it, I'd encourage you to go look at it. It's very nice. Public facility, anybody can go in there. 2013 it was completed for about $5.5 million. Again, hard to compare construction costs from 6 years ago to today. But as you can see, 8,300 square feet. So Fond du Lac, Appleton, Appleton spent more per square foot cost to put up that building, right? And so again, for consistency, upper left is the airside or the arriving aircraft, and bottom right is the departing aircraft that would be using it to go back out to their aircraft. Or the departing passengers, I should say. And then this is what we have at Whitman. When I mentioned Basler Flight Service, that's our FBO who's operating there at the airport, who's providing fueling service, hangaring service, a number of other services to the flying public, the general aviation traffic that we see at the airport. And again, for consistency, upper left is arriving aircraft, and of course there's aircraft in the photo. And then lower right is departing aircraft again. Same shots as from the exterior of what you see when you're coming or going into our community. And again, solely a general aviation airport, as we covered fairly extensively already. So you're probably already wondering the question, why am I showing everyone all this? What relevance does it have to our airport? Well, what I've got up on this slide is for 3 out of 4 of these airports who are only general aviation airports, of course Appleton has commercial service, but again, that's their GA facility. Janesville is included in the bottom right to show another modern type facility that's been done in the last few years. For those 3, actually 4 airports from a general aviation perspective, that's what people see. That's what they see when they come, that's what they see when they go. That's the impression that they get, and I'll let you draw your own conclusions on what we're portraying for the community in the facility we currently have. Again, simply meant to be informational, but that is a realistic view of what each facility looks like today. Again, the gateway to each community, and especially, you know, again, that same type of traffic, even though Appleton does have commercial service, they're not going to the commercial service terminal of the same kind of traffic that we facilitate. So again, really high level. And what I will say is with any of these projects, with anything I talk about today, I'll certainly answer any question anyone has within our time limitations. But I'd be more than willing to come back at a later date. In fact, I foresee myself being in front of this group many times, right? Hopefully I have enough longevity to make that happen, right? But I see myself in front of this group many times. And I'm sure one of the discussion points, the discussion topics of projects will be the redevelopment of the terminal area, which we'll get into in a second. But what are our needs long term? I mean, here's the why, right? Okay. If you didn't already need somewhat of a why of looking at the last picture, here's what we do need. Airport administration, office space. I say adequate conference room space, nothing too crazy, nothing too huge, but conference room / meeting room space at the airport, which we currently do have in the existing facility. Airport operational equipment storage space. So that's something where I've heard a lot of folks say, well, let's build what Fond du Lac has. That works for us. We have different needs than the Fond du Lac County Airport does. We're a different airport, we're much busier. We have a different set of needs than Fond du Lac does. So that airport operational equipment storage, essentially garage space, if you will. However, that's something that facility doesn't have in Fond du Lac. Basler Flight Service, as we mentioned, is the FBO, and that's the only FBO at the airport. And then Hertz Car Rental, which is currently in the existing terminal, still rents space, still is a revenue-paying tenant, provides a service for the flying public, and provides a service for the community. If you need a rental car and you're looking to get one from Hertz in this community, you're going to go out to the airport. That's where they are. So they're a long-term tenant at the airport. They provide a service, again, to not only the flying public, but the public in general. So that led us to 2017, right? The end of 2017. I think for those that were on the county board would recall that we were along, the airport was along the path of requesting funding to build a new facility. Well, what we've been talking about for a while now, a new general aviation support facility, right? You'll notice I did not call it a new terminal, because when you hear the word new terminal, what's the first thing that pops to your mind? I'll if I may.
Please.
Commercial service, right? So simply put, it's not a new terminal, right? It's a general aviation support facility, just like they have it in Fond du Lac, Appleton, Janesville. I could go on and on and on. There's a number of GA airports in the state, right? There's 117. However, the functionality of a building is what's important here long term, 40 years, 50 years down the road. So what happened I don't have to rehash every bit of old history, but what happened up until end of 2017 is we went through a number of iterations with the Aviation Committee. I say we as the airport. Of course, I wasn't around. Well, I wasn't here anyhow. The Aviation Committee and the County's Facilities Committee went through a number of redesigns along the lines of building a new facility. It started at, I believe, a little bit over 21,000 square feet for a new facility. Came down at one round of downsizing, if you will, to 17,000 square feet. And then as of mid to late 2017, 12,500 square feet that's sitting over my left shoulder. That's what's been designed. That's what's 100% design plans that are now sitting on a shelf. However, I don't show you this building to say, in fact, again, I'm pretty adamant of saying that I was not here at that time frame. I think everybody understands that. But I don't show you this building to say that's exactly what I would have built. I'm not saying it's exactly what I believe needs to be built as far as the appearance of it, as far as the exact configurations of what goes where. You could sit here and get down into the weeds and the details. Probably too far for 36 supervisors, right? That's why we're handling it at the committee level still, the Aviation Committee and the Facilities Committee, along with staff. But 12,500 square feet. That's the number, the total building envelope, the total square footage of the new facility. That's the number that we got to as an airport, Aviation Committee, et cetera, facilities. And I don't believe that's oversized. I and we'll talk about the options coming up here. But I don't believe that's oversized. I mean, knowing what I know about what our needs actually are, I don't believe 12,500 square feet is oversized. I've talked specifically with the airport manager in Fond du Lac, and I think a few of the county board members have heard this before. But Fond du Lac has continued to say, we wish we would have built it bigger. 2009, they built it. It's 6,500 square feet, but they have a number of drawbacks to the amount of square footage they have. A number of things they say, well, we wish we'd have, they've got Hertz in a corner right now. Hertz doesn't have space. Hertz wants to be there. And they're ostensibly renting them a very small little corner, maybe a quarter the size of what used to be the jury box, maybe about a quarter the size of that. And it's just a little desk, and that's it. But Hertz wants to be there, wants to provide the service, and whatever agreement they've worked out, that's the only space they've had to rent them. That's just one example of what their shortcomings are down there. Just to refresh everyone's memory, $4.5 million was the building and the site work cost. About $1 million was to demolish the existing commercial service passenger terminal we still have at the airport, for a total project cost of $5.5 million. And again, I will say, that's 2016 estimates. So a number of the things you're about to see are based upon those 2016 estimates, along with 3 other options that we have identified at the direction of the Aviation Committee and the direction of the Facilities Committee, and both the chairs of those committees. So, it's in your packet. You've maybe seen it already. Aviation Committee, Facilities Committee have both been presented with these numbers. Excuse me, let me grab a drink. So both committees have been presented with these numbers. And what I will say, we can't go to option D and say 1.5 million sold. That would not solve the long-term needs for the airport. The slide I presented before that talked about the high-level needs for a facility like this. So I'll run you through them. Then you have a handout there in front of you. Options A and B center around a new facility. Option A is that 12,500 square feet we've already talked about. It's been designed. Option B, essentially, I was requested to look at an option that would make that even smaller yet. Option B would reduce it down to 10,000 square foot, so we could put a number to what we would potentially realize in savings on reducing the size of the building. Now, I will say, again, remember, 2016 cost estimates for both option A and B, that's what's driving a lot of those numbers that are up there. And again, I think a lot of folks do know what construction costs have done. In fact, I know Mr. Elder is very well familiar with that. And it's a simple reality. So if we would have been building it already, it'd have been a lot cheaper, I suppose, than what construction costs have done today. So we have to just keep that in mind with everything here. Option C, which would be to demolish the main commercial service portion of the terminal and move the airport administration office and hopefully Hertz Car Rental, because our revenue-paying tenant, but it would be very, very, very tight, into the west wing. I think a lot of folks in the room are familiar with that idea. It was passed as a budget amendment for $1.1 million in fall of 2017. And we've got a number of $2 million on the total cost of doing that option. There's a big difference in a number of things here. We did 1.1 million in the operating budget, correct, of a budget amendment to say, let's go with that option, just let's do it. Enough of this new facility talk, let's just go do it. That's what was done at this county board level, $1.1 million. And we show option C as $2 million. A number of different site work things that weren't really addressed, and a number of different things that came out of primarily it was done by Context Architects. There was a study done that addressed that very option, tearing down the existing facility, the terminal building, and moving everything into the west wing, and then putting a new roof on the west wing, and that was pretty much it. The Context study showed 1.5 to 1.6 on the least costly option, all the way up to 2.1 million. There was option A, B, and C on that Context study. So even 1.5, 1.6 million, and there's a number of things that I could sit up here and explain. I don't want to keep it within our time limit, and certainly we're going to, I'll get to kind of where our next steps are on this here in a minute, but certainly, we're a long way away from even making that option. What I will say, and I'll say that right now, is that options C, D, and E, as they stand, and those numbers that are tied to those options, like I mentioned already, I think, they're half options. They're not 50-year plans. They're not 50-year plans. They're, we'd be talking about a West Wing building that is up in the upper right-hand corner. Small, 6,200 square feet for all of those things to be under one roof. Has a number of drawbacks that doesn't allow the airport to have the operational space that it needs for equipment storage, for operations equipment, and just a whole host of other issues. So I say on there many logistical drawbacks and severe space constraints. Option D, essentially repair what we have now. Repair and repurpose to as big of extent as we can with the building we have. Repair and repurpose both the main terminal and the West Wing. Well, I suppose keep continuing the West Wing on as its continuing it on as its purpose today, and figuring out a new purpose for the terminal building itself. The drawbacks, well, 1.5 million is really essentially fixing it up, right? Putting a new roof on it, saying, well, okay, this is what we're going to have some sort of actionable 20, 30, 50-year plan, whatever it might be, for that facility. Again, trying to generate some revenue as well because it has very high operating costs. And saying, okay, we're really going to carry on as we have been. We haven't had commercial air service since 2003. The building has been designed, the main terminal's building was designed for that. If you've been in there recently or been in there ever, it hasn't changed a whole lot, at least to my knowledge over the years as far as what the structure's been. It's one big open space. And so it's very difficult to say 1.5 million, yeah, let's go with option C. It's very difficult to say that. Or excuse me, option D. Option E, this was thrown out as an idea, as something to evaluate, and we've evaluated it to a fair degree. And I should say we, facilities and finance, both directors that are sitting in the room today, we had a number of meetings to go over these numbers before we presented them to both committees. And again, draft is at the top because we're still working on fine-tuning these numbers, but these are pretty realistic numbers to what I'm describing today. We've sat down a number of times over the course of a few months in coming up with this, and I've got a whole spreadsheet which I've given to both committees that outlines where these numbers come from. So option E would be demolish the West Wing, which would be where Basler Flight Service is currently, moving Basler Flight Service into the main terminal and remodeling a portion of that terminal for them to operate. We'd be displacing them. We'd have to have a place for them to operate. And I hope I don't have to explain why Basler Flight Service is important. The nature of having an FBO at our airport is the lifeblood of a general aviation airport. Somebody has to sell fuel, somebody has to put aircraft in a hangar, somebody has to provide all those services I mentioned before that the general aviation flying public requires. So this option would be saying, okay, we're tearing down that West Wing, we're going to reutilize portion of the terminal. And so that 2.4 million still leaves us with one of the drawbacks of option D. I didn't put it on option E as well in the notes, but high utility costs, high operating costs for that building still, and it only anticipates remodeling about 3,000 square feet of the building to accommodate Basler Flight Service, and again, another half option at this point in time. So let me shift gears. I'm going to talk about the Aviation Business Park and then the master plan, and then I'll be done, and I'll certainly answer any questions. So I think we've talked a fair amount, at least since I've been here, about the business park. At least I've been in front of this board to talk about the taxiway design and connecting it to the airfield. So that's simply where it's located in relation to the airport, off of Ripple and just west of Oregon Street. Again, I think everyone has seen this rendering. Simply as a rendering of what the business park could be. It's not to say that's exactly what it's going to look like, but that's the intent. The west side of Aero Innovate Way, so if you see on the bottom, north is pointing to your right. The west side of Aero Innovate Way, county land. The east side is city-owned land. Again, 80 acres in total, 50 county, 30 city. Pretty much all the infrastructure is in. It's shovel ready. We are simply now designing a taxiway to connect it to the airfield. And that is underway. I came a handful of months prior to request the funding for that. So we're working on designing that taxiway as we speak. We're targeting, and I'm going to talk more about our business development efforts. We're targeting all those industries that you see up on the top, or sorry, on the fourth bullet point. MRO is maintenance, repair, and overhaul. If you've ever seen what Gulfstream's doing in Appleton, that's MRO. They're taking all these aircraft that people own in for maintenance, overhaul, you know, putting in new cabinetry, putting in new seats, essentially a lot of the things the airlines do just for Gulfstream's aircraft in that instance. But that's MRO, maintenance, repair, and overhaul, aircraft manufacturing, avionics, et cetera. UAVs is drones, another word for drones, really, the unmanned aerial vehicle. That technology is crazy, right? If you've been paying attention to where that's been going, it's the biggest growing sector of the aerospace aviation industry in this country. And to talk a little bit about our development efforts towards putting a business in this park, putting more infrastructure in this park and having somebody operate, create jobs, diversify the economy even further as an airport, is we've got a number of one of the things we've been working on, we've got a number of advertisements now. In fact, this one just came out today, but I'll go kind of in the list here. We've got Midwest Flyer. We've got an advertisement in there. It's on the next slide. I'll show you the advertisement. But Midwest Flyer, this is regional, exactly what it says in the Midwestern states, but very targeted towards aeronautical users, aeronautical businesses. In fact, a couple of the businesses at Whitman advertise in this as well. And so our half-page ad is in that currently, along with a campaign to go out throughout most of 2019. Our ad is in sport aviation in the December issue, and we're looking at another ad placement, hopefully the April timeframe, most likely, in this magazine again for this publication, and then we'll kind of reevaluate. Sport aviation is EAA's magazine. It's widely read. It's not only, whoops. Sorry about that, I'm gonna put this clicker down right now. So it's widely read, it's not only national, it's international. They've got members, so this goes to every single one of their members. So essentially the idea is, and you'll see it on the next slide, but the idea is to just get the message out that Whitman Regional Airport's open for business. Not only with the business park, and that's our primary goal with these ads, but just to develop further leads on the prospects for the park. But also, there's a number of parcels on the airport that are ready for other developments as well today. And we are looking for anyone that wants to come and do business in this community at our airport. And that's the primary goal. We want phone calls, we want traffic. If you know anybody that has an aeronautical business or wants to build a large hangar at the airport, send them my way. The third magazine that came out today, actually, I just got my copy today, is the National Business Aviation Association's Business Aviation Insider. I had to make sure I got it right. This is a very well-read national publication. To put it in context, the National Business Aviation Association holds the largest convention for our industry, aviation industry in the country every year. It bounces around between a couple different communities, but there's really only a couple, 2 or 3 places in the country that are large enough to hold it. It's 30,000, typically about 30,000 plus in attendance. And that's huge. I mean, that's a huge audience to get this to. So everybody that's an MBAA member or anybody that otherwise subscribes to this magazine for one reason or another or receives it is getting this. So if you have 30,000 people at a convention in our industry, this is the targeted demographic that we're looking for, and we just got this today. Another thing we did in middle part of 2018, right prior to the convention, AirVenture, was our marketing. We did a revamp of our marketing brochure. In fact, I brought a number of copies, so if anybody wants one, certainly happy to distribute those. I'll just place those here on the middle table. And that marketing brochure not only promotes the airport, not only promotes the business park, which it's aimed at, but it really goes further, and I'll encourage you to look at it, and it's also on our website, but it really goes further to saying, why Oshkosh? What does the community have to offer? Not only from What most people are thinking about is the incentives we can offer, but what does the community have to offer? What does the community have to offer from the social perspective, but what does it also have to offer from educational institutions and those sorts of things? And so there's a number of things in there that really expound upon the question of why this community. Been utilizing Constant Contact, that's new in the last few months. Email marketing, I don't know who's all familiar with Constant Contact, but it's a great tool, a very low-cost tool in order to reach people you know, reach people you don't know, reach people that are your targeted kind of demographic of who you're trying to reach out to, whatever it is. And if you saw the electronic version of the Whitman Airport newsletter, which just came out, that was sent through Constant Contact. Okay, and I can see every single person in this room who actually opened the newsletter. So don't think that I'm not watching. No, just kidding. So the newsletter is just one of the pieces of our public communication to not only airport users, but the folks that need to know about the airport. And so we're utilizing Constant Contact for continued communications with our already established list of prospects, and trying to reach new prospects. And so we've done an email blast already to some site selectors around the country who that's those companies' job, or those folks' job, to find spots for a number of different industries, number of different industries, type of companies to locate somewhere. And that's been done already. We're going to continue to utilize it pretty robustly throughout the year. And we plan to exhibit it, have a booth at AirVenture 2019. So we're working on that right now. So for those who don't have a copy of the magazines, that is the advertisement that's currently being run in the 3 that I already talked about. We will look at this and potentially change it up throughout the year. We've done, a number of ad buys that are going to serve us through 2019 for this advertising campaign, and we will keep it fresh, because when you've seen the same ad, who's seen the same ad more than once, right? You look at it and be like, I've already seen that one. Okay. We are going to keep it fresh. So we might do this ad for 1 or 2 runs in a magazine or wherever we're putting it, but we will revisit this in 2019 to keep it fresh, keep people interested. All right, and I know Chairman Ramos had asked about the master plan last time I saw you, I think. So I'm going to wrap up with the master plan. I only have 2 slides on the master plan, so just bear with me. I appreciate everybody's attention. The master plan is coming up here. We're going to be starting it in early 2019. Typically, airports do master plans every 10 to 20 years. 10 to 15 is a pretty sweet spot. Once you get to 20, like a lot of other master plans, it seems to not be real relevant anymore. 2004 timeframe is when the last master plan was completed for the airport. So now we're going on 15 years. And by the time this one's completed, it'll be closer to that 20-year mark. So that's getting started, again, early 2019. Mead and Hunt has been selected for that project. We're working now this month and probably into next month on establishing the scope of the master plan, what it's all going to address. It's fairly comprehensive, though, and they're also fairly standardized as far as the FAA has a template of what a master plan looks like for any airport. And there's certain things that have to be in there, but there's a fair amount of leeway to saying, well, it has to be tailored to that airport, right? It has to address their long-term needs. And so that's what the master plan is going to do. It's sorely needed for the Whitman Regional Airport. Strategic, long-term planning. Because without that, and without a number of other things that are guiding our planning principles, we're sort of just, let's put a hangar there. I think that's the best spot for it. I don't know. I mean, those kind of things have been done and at our airport. And so while I'm not saying everything that's been done has been wrong over the years, there are a few areas which I'll show you now that really need a relook at redevelopment long term, and is really something that is outside of our current staffing levels capabilities, which is any airport out there is typically going to hire a consultant, a planning firm, engineering firm to conduct their master plan. So it is a big effort, and I said approximately approximately 18 months. That's a rule of thumb time frame for the project. They can last longer. One of the biggest holdups is the FAA. I've talked to a number of airports around the state that have done master plans recently, and the ones that report to the Chicago FAA office, the airport district office, the things that they have to approve when you get a round of, okay, this is done now, you have to review it, sometimes that gets bogged down with the FA, but that's one factor of how they can be slowed down, but we'll ensure that it's done in a timely manner. 18 months is kind of a good rule of thumb on how long they take. And it's important for the long-term viability of the airport, primarily from a land use perspective and a planning of where can we build new hangars? What is the best and highest use for this plot of land? And I'll show you the areas that we're focusing on. So this isn't an all-encompassing list, but we're gonna show you 3 areas that we're really gonna be primarily focused on for this master plan. So the first one on your left is what I call the terminal area redevelopment. So we've talked a lot about the terminal. We've talked a lot about a GA support facility. But more than just that, it's an entire geographic area along 20th Avenue. That trapezoidal green box is sort of a placeholder, but it really is what we intend to evaluate from saying, okay, what's the highest and best use of this land long term? We're no longer a commercial service airport. 2003, right? That's been 15, going on 16 years. So what's the highest and best use of the land there in that green box along 20th, what we call our terminal area? The blue box, the east hangar area. It's tough to fully articulate the challenges that we have with that whole area. It's a pretty large geographic area. And Sonics, Myers Aviation, Aviation Services, those are the 3 businesses that kind of anchor that area. And aside from that, there's a lot of hangars. Whether they're county owned or they're privately owned on land leases, there's a lot of hangars in there. Well, they've been kind of dispersed out. I hate to use the term willy-nilly over the years, but if we thought we could put a hangar there, we did it. It's not we thought we could do it, we did it, right? And so there's not everything in that area has been done in an inefficient manner as far as land use goes, but there are a number of spots within that whole shaded box that really need to be looked at, because it's one thing to say, hey, can we put hangars there? Do we need hangars? Yep, let's go put them there now. It's a whole other thing to take that whole big piece of land and say, long-term, what makes the most sense? And that's what we're going to evaluate with the east hangar area. And then the final graphic is our runways. We have 4 runways. Excuse me. We have 4 runways at the airport. 2 are our primaries, which I'm going to attempt to use this. So 927, if you can see that, east and west, and that's 20th Avenue up there for reference. 927, and then 1836, which is actually our longest runway. And then we have 2 what we call diagonal or crosswind runways that form an X, kind of right in the middle of everything. But we're going to take a very subjective look at this. You may have heard talk about the runways at the airport. Do we need 4? Do we need 3? Do we need 2? Hopefully you subscribe to the fact that we at least need 2, right? However, 4 is that the right number, and the way they're configured. So there's a number of things that go into this evaluation that the master planning firm, airport staff, and also a very robust public involvement process. Anytime you're talking about decommissioning or removing the runway at an airport, it's something we want to get everybody's input on, especially from the users of the airport. And it's not something that's ever done lightly. And I'm not saying that is what's going to happen. I'm saying it's going to be subjectively analyzed because we've got 4 runways. 2 of them are being funded by the FAA and the state, 2. So the other 2 would be on the county to fund right now. And that's simply because they say, well, you have to prove that you have the necessity for 4 runways. And that'll be addressed through the master plan because those runways can't continue to be runways without a certain amount of capital investment, the 2 diagonal runways in the center. So that's kind of the high level look at what we're going to try to accomplish, what we will accomplish with the assessment of our runway, what we call our runway needs assessment. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about that as well. With that, there's my info. Email me, call me. I'd like to say, Mary Beth is smiling, but hopefully every one of my aviation committee members realizes. I'd like to say I'm one of the most accessible people that you're ever going to meet. I'm not joking when I say call me. If you have a question, I'll answer it. If I can't answer it, I'll figure out the answer and I'll get back with you. But never never feel that you can't reach out. In fact, I encourage it. So that's my information. Below is the airport's information. If you do Facebook, Instagram, whatever, we're pretty active on both of those. And if you have a minute and you have one of those accounts, just follow us on Facebook or Instagram and keep it up to speed on some of the things that are going on at the airport on a daily or weekly basis. So with that, I'll answer any questions.
Wonderful, thank you. We'll open it up for questions now. I see 2 lights, so first I'll call on Supervisor Powers, followed by Supervisor Wingren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim, I was wondering, had 2 questions, and I'll state them both because they're both kind of short. When you're talking about the various educational activities going on out at the airport, is there anything on the high school level? And the second question was, when you talked about in your ads, what does Oshkosh have to offer? Are you also sort of branching out for the rest of the county and surrounding areas that we have in the Fox Valley area? Those are my 2 questions. High school, and are you stressing something besides just Oshkosh?
Great questions. As far as the high school perspective, we've got Fox Valley Tech, which is a technical college. Of course, everybody's pretty well familiar with Fox Valley Tech. We've got Fox Valley Tech doing what they do with the 3 programs that I outlined before. And I've already met with the new superintendent of the school district. Is that Vicki Cartwright? I met with her one time, and I said, that's something that I've recognized, and I'm only 32, but I've been out of high school for 15 years now. I've been out of college for about 10. And it's something I've recognized that as a kid growing up, how many people understand they can get into these jobs? How many people even realize there's the thing called an airport manager? My job is not something people think about most of the time. I'm not saying that it's not important, because it certainly is. But it's something that kids don't know. They think, well, I can go be a pilot. A lot of kids think about that, want to be a pilot. I can go be a pilot. Maybe I can be a flight attendant. But do they know you can be an aircraft mechanic, work at Basler Flight Service in the FBO, work at Basler Turbo? So the outreach to the high school system, I've already sort of begun, at least with my initial meeting with Ms. Cartwright, and I've offered to her, I'll come speak to any high school that you want me to come speak to really start getting more of that link established between technical programs, university programs like UWO as an aviation management track, and really starting to link in. Now, I will say there are some entities out at the airport. One of them would be EAA that does a lot to foster younger folks' involvement in aviation, younger folks' involvement in understanding that while pilots is kind of what everybody gravitates to, there are other ways to get involved. They do it through their Young Eagle program, which is a pilot program. And all the way, I think it's kids up to 17 can participate in that. So there's a number of different things that are ongoing, various different initiatives that are certain entities at the airport that are ongoing to try to reach that middle school, high school level student to try to get them involved in aviation. Realize there's plenty of careers out there, and they're in high demand. A lot of them are in very high demand right now. And then, could you repeat your second question?
Second question, when you were talking about, stressing in the ads, what does Oshkosh have to offer? What else in the county or in the surrounding areas around Winnebago County?
So I think everybody took,
if anything.
I think everybody took my marketing brochure or our marketing brochure for the business park. It's pretty comprehensive in there. Excuse me. So not only just the community, but that is really the focus of what we're saying, why Oshkosh, why this community, why this airport, what we have to offer. There's a number of other things in there that talk about different institutions around the region. So, and statewide initiatives, incentives that are also in there. So if someone didn't get a copy of the marketing brochure, what I'd say is go to our website, whitmanairport.com, and their marketing brochure is on there, and read it. It's 6 pages. We try not to overload people with information, try to give them what they want or need to know in their decision-making process. So our focus is this airport. Our focus is this community. However, there's a number of things that are outlined in that brochure that tell people more than just this narrow focus on the community here only.
Well, I guess my point is that because this is a county facility, we're not just Oshkosh. I represent Oshkosh, but we are more than just Oshkosh.
Sure.
Okay, that was what I was pushing for.
But
Thank you.
the airport is physically located in this city. So that's why the focus on this city is that's the closest thing.
Thank you, Supervisor Powers. Next speaker is Supervisor Wingren, followed by Supervisor Lenz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm still struggling with you're only 32?
I'm 33 next month, so think about what you're going to get me for my birthday.
That's much better, much better. You talked about land use, economic impact, business park, all interrelated. I suspect that much of your job is like a juggler. You got so many things going that it must be hard to keep all the balls up in the air there without dropping some, and I'm sure you're not going to. My question has to do with the issue that faces the city of Oshkosh, and that is the Aviation Plaza. The city council last week struggled with a situation where, because of the zoning, whether county zoning, I guess, and city, economic development there is almost impossible. They pointed out that a subway can't even be built there because of the zoning. The old subway there could not be rebuilt if it was somehow, destroyed or whatever. That's at Aviation Plaza out where Penny's used to be and Rogan Shoes is now, where the original Walmart was. They ripped that down. Can you work with the city and come up with a solution to that problem? That seems to be a big hindrance to development on that side of town.
Excuse me, that's an excellent question. Actually, I've already been in touch with city officials. They put out an RFP for a relook at airport zoning, and primarily, well, not primarily, but all those properties you mentioned are within the city, are city owned, or at least the land around them. Some obviously privately owned, I'm sure, but the city has already put out an RFP for a zoning update. In fact, I believe it's Mead and Hunt that was selected on that, which ends up being the same as our master plan. But, now don't quote me on that, but I believe it's Mead and Hunt. But the city planner reached out to me before they even put the RFP out, asked for my comment on it, and we most definitely work together with the city because, whatever they're working on to try to essentially bring the zoning regulations up to 2019, 2020, whenever it's finished. Bring them up so that we can coexist and have developments that I've seen where JCPenney's was, and Rogan Shoes I think is the only thing left over there. It is off the end of our one of our main runways. And so working together to make sure we're accurate and in the modern era on what zoning has to be around the airport. But we do have to protect the approaches of the airport, and we certainly don't want to put people in harm's way. Approach zones of runways are areas that are looked at very sensitively, not only from the airport's perspective, but the FAA as well. So we'll certainly make sure we're involved. In fact, they're well aware that I intend to be involved the whole way. So our staff, anyhow.
Thank you, Supervisor Wingren. Next speaker is Supervisor Lenz, followed by Supervisor Shorsey.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks for the presentation, Jim. I have a few questions that I had. It sounds like we're probably going to need to do something with the support facility. Besides from, I captured Basler and Hertz. What other businesses will be disrupted, whether we're putting a new roof on or building a new building?
As it stands today, businesses, those are the two as far as that facility's discussion would be concerned. Airport administration, which would be myself, the airport secretary, and the operations and maintenance manager for the airport, so three folks. We're an entity of the county, of course, but we reside within the existing terminal right now. So 3 entities as it stands today.
Supervisor
existing
Wingren,
entities.
if you could please give him an opportunity to speak. Sorry. Please.
No, you're fine. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, I was just curious to how many of the, I think you said 548 jobs would be disrupted during that time frame. But to the question about, or the point of 548 jobs, do you have a breakdown on how many or percentage-wise of those are full-time jobs versus maybe seasonal jobs? So these are the non-EAA ones that you had in your slide.
So 548 is non-AirVenture, right, as far as the economic impact study that was done in 2012. And I don't have that breakdown on hand, but I can certainly, I've got all the files, all the data that was used to compile that study.
And that's fair if you don't have it now. I'm probably gonna be bugging you anyway.
No,
for it to-
I'll jot a note and make sure I get that to you. And the breakdown of full-time employees versus part-time employees. But I want to say, typically speaking, and I'll have to double check, but typically speaking, the focus is on full-time employees, or at least full-time equivalent employees
Right.
in an economic impact study. So I'll have to get that breakdown for you, but I don't have it offhand.
I just noticed the number was 2,000 some for the EA. I'm assuming those are probably more heavy on the seasonal side. I'm curious to how many of the jobs are out there actually, as you said, FTE. The last thing I have for you is in your discussions and plans, are there, you mentioned, I think, a conference room possibly with a potential design. Are there any plans of having conference rooms in facilities that people from around the county will be able to rent out and utilize either for business purposes or for other community reasons?
Yes, so the design for the new GA facility was on track until the fall of 2017, has in it today, community room or meeting room space that's rentable, that's usable, depending on who it is. Certain folks we charge if it's like another county department, when their facilities needed to use it or something else like that, it would probably be no charge. But it's something that's rentable to the public, similar to what we have in the current terminal, where we have the old holding area, that's our conference room, and we rent that out as demand fluctuates. We rent it out sometimes for a whole week, sometimes just for one day, sometimes just for one meeting, but we do rent that out. So, but with the new facility, that was designed in X number, I don't have the square footage offhand, but X number of square feet of meeting room, community room, kind of flex space that can be utilized for those sorts of things.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Lenz. Next speaker, Supervisor Shorsey, followed by Supervisor Eisen.
First of all, Jim, I want to say I read the newsletter, was just really impressed with how it was done, and I think it's very smart, especially as we start moving through these complex decisions. So thank you very much for that. Numbers, let's talk numbers. And as my request would be for the planning team to really flesh out the numbers when we start looking at those options. And when it comes to at explaining a decision you all arrive at, or presenting it to other people, that there's a the cost comparisons are very clear, and also the functionality issues. So we have some kind of a document that in a short, sweet way really shows us what makes most sense, and so not. And it's kind of a, you know that there are options in there that you don't want to live with, and yet it's good to show, because we have people on the Board of Supervisors that are different ends of the issue. So it would be nice to see how you were led to the conclusions you reached, and from a financial perspective. That was one thing. And then just had a question about Basler's current square feet. And then what is the square feet in the new design, if we were to
So
go
are we
that
just
way?
talking about office space?
Whatever they need for their reception and that sort of thing, not for their
Currently, they lease 6,200 square feet.
6,200.
They lease the entire West Wing building
And have
under
they
their
asked
lease
for
now.
more?
Have they asked for more space?
Yeah.
No, they have not asked for
Okay.
more space.
Okay.
And that's just the office space, right? So they
Right.
lease hangar space,
Right.
ground
Right.
space,
I
ramp
was thinking,
area.
More
Right.
office reception.
Yep, 6,200 currently.
Yeah.
And if you looked at the design of what we built for what we had designed for a new GA facility, that was certainly less space for Basler. Some of that flex space they'd probably want to rent out if they could during like AirVenture timeframe or
Right,
something like
right.
that. But it was more right sized to what they actually need. Do they need 6,200 square feet? No, they don't on a daily basis. I was in Cheyenne, Wyoming, which is a very similar airport to Whitman in a lot of respects. Not in every respect, but in a lot of respects. And the airport there operated an FBO that had a 4,000 square foot building.
Okay.
And, you could say 4,000 was pretty adequate. 6,200 for an FBO their size is, they have some space that they don't really utilize fully, but they do lease it all.
Okay, that's good. And then, so we are currently with the two tenants, we are leasing the space to them, and when we lease the new space, if we decide to go in that direction, would the lease fees be based on the construction costs, or is it a market, market rate for lease space?
Kind of twofold, based upon the construction cost and the financial, tie to how long it's going to take to pay back that space that's been built. There's an acceptable level, I'm sure, in everyone's mind of what they think that is. And then, of course, market, right? Like renting real estate, almost anywhere else. Now, with Basler Flight Service, I would point out that just because their square footage rate is a certain rate of the actual office space, whether that be in the current building or a new facility, they pay a number of other fees to the airport. One of them would be fuel flowage fees, which are 10 cents a gallon. And so we're projecting they're going to sell about 1 million gallons of fuel next year. We get 10 cents of every gallon, right? That's $100,000. So there's other factors that play into, and I will say airports are very unique in the real estate market, right? And especially the general aviation airport. Right. So while it's kind of a mix of those two things, market rates, like say for a Hertz car rental, okay? Right. Market rates of new construction, what people are getting in other areas of this area, in this town or other areas of the county, whether that be a different town. Market rates are playing into pretty much every real estate transaction.
And we're very dependent on Basler versus a Hertz, Enterprise will meet people at the door, that type of thing. Okay. And then the other question, could you comment on city chamber involvement? I know that they're very involved in the project. Can you just tell us a little bit of detail about what they've committed to do with us on this project?
Well, I've had 1 or 2 meetings now with the Chamber of Commerce, just kind of getting to know them, getting to know their staff. And we've talked about the needs of the airport, not only this project, but a few other projects, and kind of what's going on, a lot along the lines of what I've presented here today. And so we've had that relationship building with the Chamber. They are supportive of what the airport needs, as far as I understand. They've been a long-term supporter of the airport going way back to the commercial service days and prior. And, essentially, it's just two sides of a different coin. Up till 2003, we had commercial service, and since we haven't, right? But the general aviation, the economic impact, the jobs that are created, everything that goes on at the airport, the Chamber has an interest in, right? And helping businesses in this community, and if we're just talking about the Oshkosh Chamber of Commerce, I know there's other chambers of commerce throughout Winnebago County, but if we're just talking about, if that's who the question is aimed at, they're interested in making those businesses as self-sustaining and as profitable and as strong as they can be. I mean, so nobody wants to see most businesses go out of business, right? So, but what we do at the airport and what the airport facilitates plays into that. So I've had a number of meetings with them. Just to kind of let them know where we're at, but I mean, it's a bit premature to say anything they've committed to. I don't know if what you're certainly be referring
until we've gotten specifics, but I guess at this point we are working with them. They're a key stakeholder, and then any others in the county that would be key stakeholders.
Yep, and one of the things I was going to mention before my mic goes dead is that the airport is exhibiting at the Chamber's Business to Business Expo January 31st. That was on my notes. I couldn't find, but it's at least in my head. And so the airport's exhibiting that. I don't know that the airport's done that in the past. In fact, from my knowledge, we haven't. But it's, again, to continue those strong relationships with the Chamber that we've already started to build. But beyond that, information about the airport. We're going to be front and center. In fact, I'm still waiting on 3 banners. Well, I actually got them today. I didn't bring them down, but we've got 3 promotional banners we produced for the airport to set up a booth space. I talked about the Chamber Expo, AirVenture 2019, a number of other events we see using those in. In fact, the Aviation Committee will see those next month, or if you come to the Chamber Expo on the 31st, come see us. Yeah.
Thank you. And then just one other thing that, as a promoter came to mind is, at the appropriate time, it would be nice if we could work through the supervisors in their districts and actually do, when we're ready to start talking to the general community, to actually do an invitation. And we as supervisors bring people to an open house and an information session and that sort of thing. If I just wanted to put that in your mind. But I think it would be a nice opportunity both for the airport and then also for supervisors who will be making decisions on this important project.
Sure.
So, thank you.
And I see through the master plan process that we're about to start, there's a number of things that are very well defined by the FAA of public involvement, right? And so it's well documented, most master plans are pretty robust, whether that's a workshop and something along the lines of what you mentioned, or a straight open house. There would be a number of those throughout that process, whether that's talking, whether it's focused on runways, whether that's focused on the terminal area, whether that's focused on the east hangar or another area of the airport. It's going to be, in the next month or two, the scope of that project will be fleshed out, and I think you'll see some real positive outcomes. The county board will certainly be involved in that process as obviously one of the stakeholders. We try to cast as wide of a net as possible in the public involvement arena because we want to take in as many people's opinion and stance on a project as possible, long-term capital, long-term strategic planning for the airport, and I think you'll see that through the master plan.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Shorsey. Next speaker is Supervisor Eisen, followed by Supervisor Ellis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have an observation to share with the director and the body, as well as a question. And I would like to make an observation that looking at the 2019 capital improvements plan, which has been displayed online, but I don't see any paper copies being distributed, but I think we had an email which asked for that or said that would happen. But nonetheless, my observation is, number one, that the capital improvements of 2019 does not list funding or having a support facility within the 5-year planning horizon. But at the same time, it does have the master plan. And I think that that's a good idea in the sense that we should have our master plan before we sink $2 million or $4 million or $6 million into a support or a reconstructed support facility. That's my observation. My question is, in respect to the minutes of the Aviation Committee and the minutes of the Facilities Committee, they identify a organization that is called the Tenant Advisory Group. And many of the supervisors here were at a public hearing at the airport perhaps 2 years ago. And there was some grumbling at the time by tenants or attendees at that meeting about the idea of demolishing the terminal. And could you comment with up-to-date information in respect to the tenants advisory group and their opposition to tearing down the terminal?
Well, what I'll start with is say that the tenant advisory group, which is 8 or 9 members currently, was spurred on by the Aviation Committee, wanting a kind of a sounding board on the important users of the airport, what their opinions were, bouncing certain ideas off them, certain agenda items. Where they meet once every other month, so bi-monthly, right? Every other month. And then they report back to the Aviation Committee on the off month. It came out of a number of things. There was a former group, I believe, for the airport. I think it was labeled the Airport Business almost association group. It was very much a sort of a similar group to what the tenant advisory group is now. So it was spurred on by the Aviation Committee wanting some additional input from a number of users at the airport. I believe one of the first meetings that we had with the tenant advisory group, one of the discussions was the terminal, but it was so, at least from my perspective, now we're kind of back to the drawing board, if you will, on that project. Not the complete drawing board, but out of 100 squares, we're at maybe square 5 now again. The tenant advisory group, I believe, did address that in one of their first meetings, if not their very first meeting, and started to talk about it. You say that there's all this opposition to tearing down the terminal, but there might be a couple of folks that feel that way. I don't know that it's the vast majority that feels that way and feels that a 40,000 square foot terminal facility is going to serve us for the next 50 years for something we may need 12,500 square feet for, right? So that's one of those things where I'd like to clear up any misconception that everyone thinks it's a bad idea to tear down the terminal. I don't know that that's the feeling of the majority anyhow. I think there's a couple people that might feel that way.
Well, I would just interject that it is reported in the Aviation Committee minutes that no stakeholders are anxious to see the terminal torn down. That's what's been transmitted to the public, to the supervisors. So I think my question's very relevant, and I think as we go through the process of updating the master plan, the pieces and the options, the 5 options that you discussed with us will fall in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Eisen. I'll call on the finance director. She has some information. Please.
Well, Supervisor Eisen, I just wanted to also address your other question. I did email out the capital improvement plan, and in my email it did say that I will have the hard copies available to you at next Tuesday's board meeting. They're being printed right now, but I just wanted you to be able to at least look at them until they're printed. So I do have one copy up here to show you, but they're in print right now. Secondly, the reason I didn't put anything about the terminal of that $1.1 million in the capital improvement plan is because this only includes monies that would be bonded, and the way the amendment was passed, it was operating dollars that come out of the undesignated general fund. And again, we didn't have the rest of the plan either. I hope that helps.
It's moved beyond the capital improvements plan.
Correct, but we are
Okay.
carrying over the money, but in my operating dollars, because that is how
Okay.
the amendment was passed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I take the liberty while Director Shell is before the body to address a question that is in that emanates from the capital improvements plan?
Please, go ahead.
Thank you. The capital improvements plan for 2018 designated $750,000 towards a fire vehicle, a ARFF vehicle. The 2019 capital improvements publication designates $250,000 toward that vehicle. While you're with us, could you reconcile those discrepancies?
Are we referring to a previous CIP than the one that's
Yeah.
out now?
2019, I believe, had for 2018, $750,000 allocated towards a ARFF vehicle. And 2019 has $250,000 allocated 2 or 3 years into the future?
Well, not being around when the prior CIP was created, I'd say it's probably twofold. One, it would be a different vehicle we're talking about, a different ARF vehicle, not the same vehicle. ARF is aircraft rescue firefighting. That's the terminology that we utilize. They're specialized vehicles. Oshkosh Corp builds them along with some other manufacturers. And so the 750,000 probably along the lines of more like the full-size 1,500 Strikers that we have at the airport fire station right now. The 250,000 will be more along the lines of what I had in a request for my capital line item in my operating budget that got pulled out through the executive review of my budget, which would be a rapid intervention vehicle, or a RIV is what we call it, but rapid intervention vehicle, much smaller, much lower cost. And we still do, honestly, twofold, have a need down the line for replacing one of our larger vehicles, which would be along those lines. And 750 is a number, but I didn't put that number in that CIP, right? And 250,000 is more the RIV vehicle, the rapid intervention vehicle. So we have needs long term. I will say everything that we could possibly think of is not contained within the county CIP, but the county CIP is simply a list, right? I mean, none of them are funded. At least most of them aren't funded in the outlying years. So that would be the explanation, I guess, to your question.
Well, thank you for resolving the discrepancy.
Thank you, and thank you, Finance Director Fitzgerald. Next speaker is Supervisor Ellis, followed by Supervisor Lott.
Thank you, Chairman. In the aviation business that we got in the country or in the world, is there any of them that want to build on the Oshkosh property and the Brennan property in the Oshkosh or in the county yet?
I think I'm unfamiliar with the Brennan property.
That's where the business park is.
Oh, okay. There are a number of prospects, yes, and we've been talking to a few of them for multiple years. Certainly something that we keep close to the vest because, you know, in business development, as you'll see with a Go EDC in the community, they're not out there broadcasting who exactly they're all talking to. However, yes, there are a number of prospects, and what I've said, I think, before, and I'll continue to say, is that development of, let's say, the aviation business park, if that's the question, and other parcels on the airport, is along the lines of company XYZ's timeline, and we can do things to spur that on. We can do things to make them aware that we're here, and I think you saw a lot of that. And we can do the things with the marketing brochure that says, here are all the reasons why, here are all the incentives. You know, maybe not every single thing is in that brochure, but it's pretty comprehensive. Now, again, it's on their timeline. You know, if they're going to acquire a company, if they're looking to relocate, if they're going to diversify what it is they do, and you know, need a new place to operate, whatever that is, the needs of that company are what come first, especially if they're the ones talking about some sort of infrastructure investment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Ellis. Next speaker is Supervisor Albrecht, followed by Supervisor Binder.
This is on your aviation business park. A year and a half ago, I was involved with the county's association board of directors, and they had a meeting, and there was a man there from the federal government that gave out economic development loans, and he says, he made it quite clear, he says, you get one non-government business located on that airport, and there will be all the federal dollars that you need to help other businesses locate there. But it had to be a non-government, and we had to get something there on our own.
I'm unfamiliar with that conversation, but certainly believe that was a conversation that was had. I don't know. Is there a question?
No, I'm just explaining that that's what's out there.
Sure. I mean, our target is private companies for the most part. I mean,
I understand you,
right.
and you've said that you have a lot of businesses that you're working with right now already, so.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Supervisor Albrecht. Next speaker is Supervisor, oh, I apologize. I turned off your light. You're correct. You are next. Supervisor Lautenschlager is next, followed by Supervisor Binder.
I just thought I was lost somewhere.
I apologize. I turned on your mic a little too soon and turned it off, and it turned you off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Jim, I think it was a wonderful presentation that you showed us here. I think you definitely taught this board and the community the importance of this airport, that I think a lot of the community thought that this airport, since we lost the commercial airline, was, what's it good for? Why do we have this or whatever? But I think you did a wonderful job at that. But then I've been looking at all the plans, the different options that you did, and I'm glad that you emphasized on the one option that if we move everything over to the Basler and renovate that, or move Basler over to the new part and renovate that, the only drawback of doing that from the choices from building a new one is it's not going to change our utilities. I mean, the high utility cost is going to stay the same. So, I mean, to me, if we're going to look at building a new facility, it's got to be brand new, and you got to build it green, and you got to make it energy efficient and economically feasible, because just moving one side to the other, yeah, and renovating might be cheaper, but utility-wise, you're not saving any money. So, but thank you, you did one wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Supervisor Lautenschlager. Next speaker, Supervisor Bender.
I guess I would support a new facility, but my biggest concern would be is maybe pricing our tenants right out of the building. You know, like you were saying, Basler's at 6,000 square feet. That building's probably gonna cost $6 million. That would be $3 million to build 6,000 square feet for Basler's. I don't think they would wanna pay us $300,000 a year to rent that. So my concern would be that you talk to Basler's and Hertz and see what their budget will allow, because we don't wanna price them out of a building. I mean, we can only build what they can afford to pay rent on. It's like building a rental house that basically costs more than you can rent it for. You're gonna go out of business. And that's what we need to do. We need to make sure that Basler's and Hertz are gonna be able to pay what it costs the taxpayers. The taxpayers don't wanna subsidize Hertz. You know, there's a credit union right across the street if Hertz needs to put a car rental place there. You know, I have no problem building a facility for the Winnebago County employees to work out of, but I have a problem subsidizing something for Hertz or Basler's.
Okay. Well, that's certainly, I guess I'll address it, that's certainly a major piece of the puzzle as far as a new facility or utilization of a facility we already currently have, whether that's remodeling or what have you, or tearing down one and moving into the other and remodeling, whatever the direction we go on this, it has to serve the needs of the airport. Basler Flight Service is the largest paying tenant of a facility like that in this whole scenario. Of course, Hertz Car Rental would occupy less space than Basler Flight Service. However, they're both revenue-paying tenants, and we're certainly not going to build, if we go down the route of a new facility, we're not going to build a facility that Basler Flight Service is going to say, well, we can't financially make that happen. That's not in the cards as far as what we'd want to see out of the new facility. And we can sit and talk the rest of the night about the terminal if you'd like, but you know, I anticipate through the Aviation Committee and the Facilities Committee, in fact, one thing I was going to mention is the next step then at the committee level is to hold a joint meeting in February. We still have yet to determine that date. In fact, I know Facilities meets tomorrow, which I'll be at. Mike's at the back waiting to speak. But our next step is a joint meeting of both committees, reviewing the cost options analysis, trying to figure out what makes the most sense for the airport to start moving in a direction. Because we were in a very firm direction up until just under a year and a half ago in building a new facility. Now we're back a bit to the drawing board. We're back a bit to almost square one, maybe square five. However, of course, the long-term plan for the airport on a GA support facility has to be financially self-sustaining and long-term. Now, let's say we build a $6 million facility. Is it going to pay itself back in year one? Well, of course it's not. Is it going to pay itself back in year 20? Perhaps, depending on what it is we build. However, I think I talked about that before. Everybody's going to have a difference of opinion on how many years it should take to pay back the infrastructure investment.
Normally, it's 20 years is what they take it out on. And all I'm saying is Basler's maybe can only afford 3,500 square feet, and you'll have to basically maybe have two other tenants come into that 12,000 square foot building to make it the numbers work out so the taxpayers can afford it.
Sure,
You know,
and-
you may need more than 2 tenants in 12,500 square foot building. I mean, right now, you have 2 people in your office, and Basler's has a few people, and Hertz has 1. So a 12,500 square foot building, I think we could maybe make a couple more spaces and get a little more revenue coming in.
Sure, and Basler Flight Service in the facility that was designed had appreciably less square footage. I think I touched on that before, between 2,000 and 3,000 square feet total. You could look at that a couple different ways on what their footprint was in that new design, but that's less than half of what they have now in 6,200 square feet. Now, that's what they would lease on a day-to-day basis, right? And so there's some flex space built in that they could lease if they needed extra space during AirVenture. And they utilize the entire building during AirVenture, the 6,200 they have now. So we're certainly going to take all that into account, and I appreciate the comments.
Thanks.
Thank you, Supervisor Bender. One final, all right, we'll have 2 more questions, and then we're going to wrap this portion of the agenda up. So with Supervisor Lautenschläger, and then we'll have one final question by Supervisor Warnicki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the things that I forgot about when I was speaking before, but on Supervisor Eisen's comment on, and I know that the master plan is very important, but I think you told us in the aviation committee that master plan could take 18 months, 2 years. I mean, we've been dealing with this airport issue for almost over 10 years. I mean, I don't think, even though I know the master plan is important, can you tell us, do we have to wait for the master plan to be completed before we could possibly proceed with something with the new facility?
That's a great question, and I appreciate you asking it. The answer is no. We don't have to wait for the master plan to be complete to continue to move forward. In fact, we're going to continue to move forward in a project like we've been discussing at length now, the terminal area redevelopment. So that building is just one piece of that, okay? Now, that piece and what was designed up until 2017 took up a very small portion of that green box you see behind you. All right, the master plan is going to address that whole geographical area, not just one building. The master plan is going to address the entire airport, really. But those are the 3 highlighted primary areas of focus for the master plan as it stands today. And we're going to continue to work on the scope of that here in the next month or 2. But we don't have to wait. In fact, we're not going to wait for a master plan to be done to continue firm progress and direction towards the facility that's going to meet the airport's needs long term. Case in point, if you want to look it up, I mean, Cheyenne, Wyoming, I was a part of a commercial service terminal project that took 10 years. 10 years, right? And so we're not going to sit here and wait for 2 more years to make progress on something we know we already need. We know we already need it, right? I mean, we know that. Hopefully everybody realizes that, but I will say it over and over again. We need a facility that's going to serve us for 40 to 50 years, okay? And the facility that's adequate for the operations of the airport. And we're talking about this GA support facility. But a number of things don't have to wait until the master plan is complete to continue on. The terminal project will be one, the terminal redevelopment, the new GA facility, whatever it is, okay, will continue on through the committees and the county board because it's going to take a number of things, a number of collaborations to get something like that done. I mean, funding is the biggest piece of it, right? Everything revolves around the almighty dollar, and that's something that took a vast majority of the 10 years in Cheyenne to put all the funding together to build the new terminal facility that opened this past fall. And so a master plan, while it is going to help address so many things for the strategic long-term planning of the airport, we already know, and we don't need a consultant to tell us we need a facility that's going to facilitate those core functions for the airport long term. But we're still going to make progress on it all the way through. Now it's going to run concurrently, of course. The master plan is going to be ongoing. So I guess the short version is no, we don't have to wait, and we won't wait for a master plan to be done to make progress on something we know we already need.
Good, that's what I thought.
Thank you, Supervisor Lautenschläger. Final question, and then we'll wrap this up, is Supervisor Warnicki.
You know, I've been on the aviation committee for quite a few years, and we did do an awful lot of planning on this, whatever kind of building you want to call it, administration building. It shouldn't be called a terminal building anyways. And we tried to get a plan going to build this thing and open up. It's sort of like a log jam that we have now. We have other projects that we need to pursue, and one of them is hangar projects. We've got a waiting list out at the airport for people who want hangars, but nobody can decide where they go. And if we went with the plan that we had, we would be closing up a couple of parking lots. There's 3 out there that are very seldom even used except for EAA. And it would be opening that up, and then hopefully we could get some kind of commercial business in there, but we need to know where we're going. And then as far as the hangars go, we don't know for sure where we want to put them. There are several options, but it's sort of holding it up. So we need a decision made as to what is going to be done. That, where the terminal building is now, that is very valuable land. That's like lakefront property out there. And, you know, I could see a restaurant going up out there. I could see several other things, and so we gotta move somehow on this project and make a decision. Do we stick money into the west side of this building and do what was voted on, or do we go with building a new building and then turning it around? Now, by eliminating the parking lots, you're also saving money on stormwater runoff. And there's also, what hasn't been mentioned is that there's fiber optic cables that have to be moved if we go with the plan that was voted on. And that's going to be quite an expensive project to do itself, and that's not in the plan right now. There's no doubt that that building should probably be ripped down. I think if you talk to the facilities guy, he'll tell you that. So I'm not going to say how I feel about it. I think everybody knows how I feel about it, but we got to do something. We can't just keep throwing this thing around. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Supervisor Warnke. Seeing no other calls, we'll go ahead and wrap up that portion of the agenda and presentation. Thank you, Director Schell, for all the information, your time, and the efforts to do this. Very much so. Okay, so we have one other presentation tonight, and that is from our Facilities Director, Mike Elder, and it's a presentation in regards to an overview and update of the facilities capital projects. So, Director Elder?
Good evening. Unfortunately, my projects aren't anywhere near as interesting as the airport. And actually what this is it's my first presentation on 4 capital projects or repairs really to several of our buildings. The type of repairs they are exceeds the $100,000 threshold that we normally go out for bonding, so it makes it a capital project. Our policies and practices are that for capital projects you get 2 presentations, one informational and then one at a later date where we come back and ask for the funding. So tonight is the first one for 4 projects, and the 4 projects are, we have the courthouse elevator modernization program, we have the Coughlin building roof replacement, we've got 4 buildings that are obsolete, unused, and sitting empty in the county that really need to be raised, or large, significant amounts of money will need to be expended to bring them up to usable standards. And the Oregon King building, we have some masonry repairs that we have to work on. The first project is the courthouse elevator project, modernization. You all have ridden up on those elevators numerous times, at least twice every time that you have a board meeting. And this project is to upgrade the controls of the 3 elevators that we have. There's the 2 passenger elevators and the prisoner elevator that the Sheriff's Department uses. And basically, the controls are from 1938. If the area wasn't inaccessible for you all, I'd love to take you up there. It reminds me of the scenes from Young Frankenstein where you just see him with relays and Van de Graaff generators, arcs and sparks and everything. It's a mechanical system that worked well in 1938. It doesn't work well now, and we can't get parts for the controls, nor can we get some of the parts that we need for the operating equipment of the elevators. We've actually had to go to the point now where we are having custom-made parts for a 1938 elevator because Otis and Dover don't supply those parts anymore. Because of these problems, or these challenges, we're having more and more instances of where the elevator goes down. We've had individuals get stuck in them. We've had the fire department come a couple times the last year to help us get people out because the elevators were stuck between floors. The prisoner elevator went down for a while because we could not get a part, and we finally jury-rigged something together to make it work, and we're keeping our fingers crossed that it'll work until we can get the funding to go ahead with this project. One of the things that you've probably noticed is when you push the hall call buttons, both elevators will come and they'll open up almost simultaneously or shortly thereafter, one of them does. And the way the controls work right now is the elevators respond to the hall calls. Newer controls will say which car is closest to the floor. So like if somebody calls for it on the 4th floor and there's an elevator car on the 5th floor, the 5th floor car will come down and get it and then take you to wherever you need. The way the system works right now is if there's an elevator car on the 1st floor and one on the 5th floor, they both respond. So that slows down people getting around the courthouse, and it's also more wear and tear on the equipment for unneeded movement. Since we moved everybody into the courthouse, when we got the court commissioners out of the safety building across the street, we've got their hearing rooms on the 1st floor. Unfortunately, the prisoner elevator doesn't stop on the 1st floor. So this project would also be to incorporate a new hall access to the prisoner elevator on the 1st floor so that when the Sheriff's Department needs to transport the inmates through the building, they're not mingling with the public on the hallways as much as they do, or we have to take one of the elevators out of service for passengers and put them on that and then bring them up to the 1st floor for the court commissioners. So that's the basic project in a nutshell, is that we want to upgrade the controls, upgrade the safety features, upgrade the equipment for it. You know, another thing, I don't know how much everybody knows about motors, but in 1938 they used to have carbon contacts that transmits the power from your distribution panel to the motor. And one of the problems, you know, bringing you up there is there's carbon dust all over the place. New equipment usually don't have carbon contacts. They're carbonless contacts. So we would end up with newer, more efficient motors. We'd have a smarter control system. We'd have improved safety features. Because once we touch any part of that, you know, like if we wanted to do a smaller upgrade, once we touch any part of it, we have to bring the 1938 equipment all the way up to the 2019. So it's not, you know, we can't just kind of phase this in. It's kind of an all or nothing type project. It was part of the courthouse relocation project. We tried to squeeze that in there to see if we could get it done all at the same time. It was a separate project before the relocation. We tried to lump it in there. It exceeded the budget of what we had for the department relocation, so we moved it back to where it was as an independent project. But we did get a good sense of what the cost of the project would be, and that is around $795,000. I do have a quote from Schindler Elevator. They were our maintenance contractor about 6 to 10 years ago, and their estimate was $600,000. So that's pretty much in line with inflation and the cost of materials and labor to increase the cost. The second project that we've got is our county, I call it our county roof project, our county roof maintenance and replacement project. And that's a phased project that we keep track of all of our roofs on all of our buildings, and we've looked at which ones have aged up to the point where we should really be replacing them. It's multi-year. We try to do a roof every year or every other year. And the building that's up now to be replaced is the Coughlin Center. It's hard for me to believe, but that building's over 20 years old now. And it's probably about 21 to 22 years that we've had the shingles on the building. We opened up the building late 1997, 1998 timeframe. So it stood the test of time. We built it with 20-year composite shingles, so they are basically at the end of their useful expected life. We have had some damage up there, and we've done some patching. But while we've been up there and with the roofers that we've had up there, they've looked at it. We've lost a lot of the granular surface. They're starting to curl at the edges, the shingles. They're starting to crack, and they're really showing their wear. And this project would be to replace the shingles, do a complete rip-off, put it back on with new shingles, redo the flashings, and replace the ridge fence. And the cost for that would be just under $160,000. The third project is the obsolete building project. We've got five buildings that we want to take down. They no longer meet a need for the county. They've sat vacant for at least 5 years for each one of them. The first one is, on the fairgrounds, we have an east garage that we call. It's towards the back of the fairgrounds area. That building used to be used for the storage for UW Extension and the Fair Association. And in 2015, we completed a building for UW Extension, the Fair Association, and they've moved all of their equipment out of there, and that building has sat there until we can get the funding for it, which is what I'm asking for tonight. We looked at trying to rehabilitate it and use it for something else, and the cost that I've got to do the rehabilitation is about $140,000 to $170,000 for some foundation repairs, some masonry structural repairs, a new roof. Part of the problem with the roof is it's an asbestos type roof, so then we have to dispose of it as asbestos. And my demolition cost estimates are about $30,000 for that building. So if we got rid of that building, it would free up some land space for the Parks Department. I know they have their RV dump station just to the north of it, I believe. And this would give them a little bit more room for them to allow their campers to circulate around the dump station a little bit easier. The second building that should come down is, we call it the old dairy barn on the old Parkview complex. It's back from when Parkview used to be the county farm. And that building was designated to be raised by the previous county executive. It was used for some storage at one time, but it really doesn't meet any need for anything. And if you are going down Butler Avenue and you look to the left as you're going down towards Parkview, it's the brown barn structure to the east. It needs major roof work, some structural work. It's loaded with asbestos. It really isn't configured well to be used for anything other than like a dairy barn. And getting rid of it would help us with the construction of the new CBRF, the new community-based residential facility. What we would do is we would get a credit for the impervious surface that building has, and it would be used to offset the impervious surface that we would be creating with the new building, to the point that the city would say it's a wash and we don't have to do any significant stormwater management work. If we would keep that building, then we would be looking at having to put in a retention pond type system. And that would add on to the cost of building the CBRF. So to do the repairs, the minimal type of repairs, would be about $150,000 to $200,000. I'm estimating our tear down cost of about $100,000. And then I don't have a really good estimate on what the cost of a retention system would be, but we'd probably be looking at about $100,000 for a pond type system for the CBRF. The next building that we need to take down is, it's the old laundry building for the most recent old Parkview. And that is, it's no longer needed. It was used for some storage, but that building too has some significant foundation issues. It needs a new roof, the siding needs to be repaired, repainted. And it's no longer needed by Parkview for storage. The idea was we were going to tear it down when we tore down the old Parkview, but Parkview needed storage space. That storage space was provided when we built the therapy addition to it. So it's really an unneeded building for us at the time. The repair cost I've got for that building would be around $175,000. The demolition cost that I've estimated is about $105,000 to tear it down. The next building is the old boiler building at Parkview. That one, we were looking at trying to use it as a garage for Parkview, but once we had salvaged out the boiler equipment, the other equipment, we could actually see that the ground underneath the slab was actually washed out, so that there was unsupported concrete in a significant portion of the garage. And then to fix that, plus to put in the drainage that we needed for the garage, exceeded the cost of tearing it down and building a new building for them. So to make that a viable garage for Parkview is $200,000. To tear down the building, I'm estimating about $90,000, and to build them a new building was probably about $130,000 to $140,000 at the time. The last building that we've got is the Williams Building. That's the building that we bought. It used to house the Veteran Service Office. It's next to the Orrin King Building, and that building was originally purchased with the idea of tearing it down to provide additional parking for the courthouse. When we bought it, the Veteran Service Office was at another building at the north end of the parking lot, and it was called the Schumerth House. It was not ADA accessible. It needed a lot of work itself, and it was determined to be a more viable option to move them into the Williams Building, which was more accessible and in better shape, and we tore down the Schumerth House. Now that we've got the Veteran Services Office into the Otter Street Building, the Williams Building is not needed for anything right now, and it can go back to what the original purpose of why we bought it was, to tear it down and provide additional parking to the courthouse. And I've got demolition costs of that to be about $110,000. The final project that I've got is I call it our facility maintenance facility masonry maintenance program. What we do is we keep a look at all of our masonry type buildings, and we monitor their condition. And when we need to, we have to go back and we have to do some, it's called tuck pointing, where the mortar's fallen out or it's cracked or caulk joints have failed, and we need to go back and fix those things. The building that needs it the most right now is the Orrin King building, or it's the next one up on the list. And the caulk joints are the original ones. They're dried and we need to go back and caulk them. There's some masonry precast panels that need to be repaired or replaced, and some of the masonry joints need to be also fixed. And the cost for that would be $110,000. And that is my list of the projects that we're trying to get done for 2019, at least at this time. And I'll take any questions.
Thank you. So we'll open up for questions. I see several. First, we'll start with Supervisor Powers, followed by Supervisor Gabbard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, it's inefficient to have the elevator in the court, the elevators in the courthouse to both go to the same call. You mentioned there was a lot of wear and tear having them both respond, but when my church installed an elevator in Michigan in the late 1980s, Otis told us not to baby the elevator, to use it as often as possible because an elevator works better. Of course, that's, again, 50 years younger than this one, but it works better if you keep using the elevator and there's not so much wear and tear. You need to do that. And my other question, I'm just asking about that, and the other question would be, you haven't mentioned courthouse windows, something we've been talking about for about 3 years. Just wonder if that's
Okay.
on your list anywhere. That's it.
The first one with the elevators, Otis is a maintenance company, so that kind of biases them towards, saying, keep using it as much as you want because it's going to wear out. And that's true if you want to leave a piece of equipment and just let it sit for a long period of time, then it would deteriorate from no use. Seals get dry, the oil doesn't circulate well, but with the kind of usage that we get in these buildings, that kind of usage is an everyday occurrence. But you do create more wear and tear every time you use a piece of equipment. And if we're doing if we're having elevators respond to non-necessary calls, that's a little sliver of lifespan off that elevator and a little bit more maintenance that we have to do on it over the period of time.
Okay.
And then for the courthouse windows, I am happy to announce that we actually have, I've got a set of specs and the drawings and everything that we're reviewing right now for the replacement window system. We just had some clarifications with the architect now on some of the features that we want. They're incorporating them, and hopefully we can very shortly get this approved through the State Historical Society and get it out for bid this spring so that we can get to work on the windows.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Powers. Next speaker, Supervisor Gabbard, followed by Supervisor Rasmussen.
I have a statement to make on the old dairy barn, and then I have a couple questions. When Bolt was here, I asked the gentleman from Bolt, are you going to have to put in a retention pond? Do you have that figured in your plans? And they stood up there and they said, we've checked with the city. We are not required to put in a retention pond. So now tonight, you've brought in the fact about the old dairy barn. If we tear that down, which I believe it should be, then we won't need a retention pond for the new facility. So I came and read that and I thought, that's interesting, just a statement. Is there any, so that's my statement on that. Now we talk about the demo costs, which I'm always interested in that. They're always so high to tear down a building. Does the county, I thought back in the day, does the county ever tear any buildings down? Between facilities and highway, I know they tore something down out by us years and years ago when it was the old 110. So do you have to bid all this out?
Yes, and basically, well,
And is
two
it
things.
because of the asbestos?
That's one. I'll address your comment first. the same problem that we have, like when we did the parking lot out at Knapp Street. Initial talks with the city was we were reducing our impervious surface by 2/3. No retention pond was necessary. When it comes time for us to go through and do plan review, that's when we get hit by, well, we want you to do this.
Yeah.
So that's what happens. You know, we go on our best interest or our best information, and then when it actually comes down to getting the final approval is when we get all the hits. Now, going back to demolishing the buildings, yes, I did work with highways, and we took down the Schumerth House. But what's happened since then is environmental laws have gotten much more strict, and highways is pretty busy most of the time, that they really don't have time to take down the buildings. And when we talk about demolishing, it's not like it used to be in the old days where you just take it down. It's more like deconstructing. So what we look at is you have to recycle as much as you can, and we will try, you know, we'll probably offer the Williams Building for sale for somebody to move it. You know, if they want to pay us $1. And if they want to move it someplace else, you know, all the more power to them. You know, we'll probably offer the same thing with the dairy barn. But the other buildings are pretty much of a waste. But when we do the deconstructing, we look at where we can send all the different stuff. And I think if we looked at the old Parkview when we took it down, we recycled like 80% of the building.
Okay, and then my other thing is when you take down the old laundry building and the old boiler building, I know they're not that big, but would that have any help with our stormwater charges that we pay to the city? Could we go for some kind of credit or revamping?
We'd go back to,
It could be minimal, but,
it'd be minimal, but yeah, we go back
okay.
and see if we can get that addressed.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Gabbard. Next speaker is Supervisor Rasmussen, followed by Supervisor Buck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regarding the Williams Building, I mean, it's a classic old house, and you just said that maybe you could sell it for $1. That'd be great. But I'm wondering, since so many departments have been moved out of the courthouse, I don't get here all the time, but it seems like this lot isn't filled that often. Do you have an idea how often this lot is actually full? When I see $220,000 just to remove the building so that we can create a parking lot, then the cost of making that into a parking lot over parking that do we need it? That's what I'm wondering.
It depends on the court cases. I do know that at least at the beginning of every month, there's not enough parking down here. And even on numerous times when I come down here for meetings, the parking lot is pretty full. And I've ended up having to go across the street to park at the Dawes Street lot, and that's sometimes full. You know, we could not turn it into parking too until we absolutely need it. But what I'm trying to avoid is the cost of keeping up the building. Right now, the squirrels are having a field day in the third floor of the building. And that's a complaint that we've had for a number of years. So the big goal of this project is to get it torn down. That's what it was originally bought and purchased to provide the parking. If we don't need the parking right now, that would be a secondary use for it. Right now, my main goal is to get it down so that I don't have to worry about putting the roof on it or the tuck pointing in their new windows.
I understand all that. My thought was if we don't really need parking, sell the place. Then we don't put anything into it. So just a thought. Because by the time you tear that down for $220,000 and build a parking lot, you're going to have $500,000 into a parking lot.
Right.
Thanks.
Thank you, Supervisor Rasmussen. Next speaker is Supervisor Buck, followed by Supervisor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike, what is the longevity of the Coughlin building? I know you said I actually worked on the building in '98, and what do you think the longevity of that building is?
It's been there 20 years, and from what I can see, it's got at least another 20 years there. We try to build the buildings for a 50-year lifespan, but if you maintain the buildings, they can last a long time. You know, if you look at any of the major cities, you know, Oshkosh, we've got buildings over 100 years old. This building was built in 1938. So while Coughlin is not as substantial as some of the older buildings built at the beginning of the 19th century, I think it could easily last 50, 75 years.
So have you looked at sustainable building products? You know, did you just look at using asphalt shingles again, or have you looked at using a metal roof panel and possibly, you know, utilizing solar energy on top of that? Has that been in your process or inquiries?
We've looked at metal roofs, and they are more expensive. And I will be blunt and say that my experience here is that they want me to be frugal with county money. And a lot of times they'll say, well, you know, we can replace the roof twice for the cost of what a metal roof would be. You know, so when we get into the design process, we'll probably take a look at all the different roofing products and see if we can't find something that would maximize the longevity of the roof. As to the solar, I am a great alternative energy source person. Personally, in 1983, I built a passive solar home. It was great. What I have found is that the photovoltaic systems are coming down in price and making them more cost effective. But the last time we looked at it, it was about a 20 to 22 year payback for it. And the materials were only warranted or estimated to last about 20 years. If we can get that turned around to be more cost effective, then yeah, we'll be putting solar stuff up there all the time. I've looked at trying to put something on the roof of the jail. You know, we've got almost like 5 acres of roof up there. We should be able to do something with it, but I can't make the cost benefit work in our favor yet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Buck. Next speaker is Supervisor Smith, followed by Supervisor Singstock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My questions were all answered already.
Thank you, Supervisor Smith. Next speaker, Supervisor Singstock, followed by Supervisor Eisen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Michael, number one, you talk about knocking down 5 buildings. The firm that bids on the building, do they have to knock down, does that firm have to bid on all 5 buildings?
No, we'll probably put it out with 5 alternates, and we may, you know, it may be worthwhile for us to get 5 different contractors to do it, or it may be more cost effective for one. We take a look at different ways to find out which is least expensive for the county.
The other thing I'm confused about, and bear with me, I don't have my glasses with me. The last sentence regarding the Williams building, that you're saying you're going to offer it for sale, contingent upon the buyer removing the building from the lot. How long are you going to put that up for sale?
Not long.
Well, that's not, give me a better, not just
We'd
that.
probably put it up for sale, you know, advertise it for about a month or so. I really don't foresee anybody wanting to buy it and move it.
Well, I'm of the same opinion. That's why I was
Yeah.
wondering why you're going to try to sell it.
Because it's a nice old building. Somebody bought the building
Yeah,
next.
but okay, it's a nice new building, but let's face realistic here. If it's gonna cost $260,000 to repair it, you'd have to say to the guy, I sell it to you for $1.
Right.
Yeah. I assume, now what I'm gonna say, I assume it's been checked out. But in case it has not been checked out, what I'm a little bit uncomfortable with is whether this can be justified as a capital project. Now, 2 people can look at the same thing and come up with 2 different answers. But my question is, does anybody think it might be in the best interest, before we even think about doing something on here, is to get the blessings from our auditing firm? Because we could be in a legal problem if we bond for something that should not have been bonded for.
I'll go ahead and call on the finance director, who can
We
probably
can
answer your question.
definitely ask our auditors, but Doug, the assistant finance director, and I have looked into this, and we feel it is a land cost because we're still preparing land for other things that we can do. But I will ask the auditors for their
Vicki,
opinion.
I think it's in everybody's
Yes.
best interest to pass it across the auditor.
We can definitely do that.
That's my suggestion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Singstad. Next speaker is Supervisor Eisen, followed by Supervisor Brun.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to commend Mr. Elder for his systematic handling of the roof replacements and masonry repairs throughout the 5 years of the 2019 Capital Improvements Plan. This is something which, some things are done each of the years all along the way, so we don't get hit with the expenses of everything at one time. The second point I'd like to share is I have a question whether the department relocation project is completed. Is everybody out and everybody in? And is that, you know?
Everybody's out, everybody's in, and they're as happy as they can be right now.
Thank you. Third question is, in the 2018 CIP, there was an allocation for a fifth-floor courthouse remodeling project. Now, that was scheduled for 2019, and it's not in the 2019 CIP. So question is, was it done? Is it going to be done? What's the status?
The status is the judge who was on the 5th floor is now on the 2nd floor. So the remodeling that he was requesting isn't needed.
Thank you. The last question that I would have also is from the 2019 CIP, in which actually it's a project, as a member of the Solid Waste Board, I'm familiar with very intimately, is that the jail waste heat supply and return piping replacement, has that been completed? From my dealings with the Solid Waste Board, it's not.
No, it's not. What we found out was that the cost to repair it, to replace the piping, the payback was not there for us anymore. So we're utilizing the system in a reduced function until we're done with the natural gas from the jail, from the landfill.
Okay. So that would explain why it's not in the 2019 CIP.
Right.
And so that's a project that's been modified. Has this, I would obviously believe that this was discussed with the solid waste department director?
We talked to him about it, not really in depth, but it would be a cost that we need to incur to replace the piping.
Okay, well, thank you very much for bringing that to my attention, and I can follow that up otherwise. And I want to thank you very much for your written description. It answered many questions that I had concerning the Parkview storage facility and needs, because the new CIP does show that Parkview is asking for more storage. And you did explain that it's cheaper to give them the new building than it is to repair those old ones which would otherwise have done the job. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Eisen. I see one other call-in. I'll call on Supervisor Brun.
Many of the things that have been spoken, I agree with. One thing I want to reaffirm, though, is I think the Williams Building is worth putting back on a tax roll rather than demolishing it. I think a lot of lawyer offices might even be interested in it. As you see all around here, old homes made it back into lawyer offices. The location would be perfect for them. And I myself have been down here enough since the move, and I don't really see a real big problem with parking. And to me, that's a very expensive parking lot for each stall. So I'd rather see it be put on the market and put some mothballs in there for those squirrels for a while and sell it and put it back on the tax roll.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no other call-ins, that will conclude the presentations. Thank you very much, Director Elder.
Thank you.
Okay, so that concludes our two presentations this evening. Before we move to adjournment, I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew the process with the two vacancies, certainly for those who are new to the board. So there is some public announcement requirements that we will have to go through working with the county clerk. Once we've gone through that process, depending on the candidates, we'll evaluate those candidates, and then it would be my responsibility to make an appointment recommendation to this board at a future county board meeting for final approval. So I just wanted to let everyone know of how that process would work. And once again, I want to thank Supervisor Hogan for his final evening. Best of luck again. And with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn, so I'll call on Supervisor Robo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll move that we adjourn until January 15th on a Tuesday at 6 p.m.
There's a motion. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.